Welcome to the Economy Magazine at I-24 News, where we provide a daily view on world markets and the global economy. I'm Binyamin Tjong-Alvares. Coming up, Venezuela faces severe shortages of basic goods despite its massive oil reserves. And a new study points to a discrepancy between Israel's investment in the West Bank versus the periphery. Let's start with the headlines. Asian markets largely slumped on Wednesday amid increasing worries about China's economy. The Hong Kong Hang Seng Index closed down 1.2%, and Japan's Nikkei 225 closed down 0.39%. The Shanghai Composite Index staged a striking rebound going into the midday break, as mainland brokerages were suspected of plowing cash into the market at Beijing's direction. China's main stock benchmark closed down 0.2% at 3160.17 after falling nearly 5% immediately after opening. Fears of China's economic slowdown also pushed down global markets overnight, putting the Dow Jones Industrial Average down 9.9% to date this year. The Canadian economy shrank again in the second quarter, putting the country in recession for the first time since the financial crisis. Canada has been primarily hit by the slump in crude prices, with weakness concentrated in energy-related sectors, and the plunge in oil prices has spurred companies to chop business investment. The Canadian dollar initially rallied to a session high against the greenback following the data before giving up ground later in the day as oil prices fell. Still, economists mostly agree a 0.5% pickup in June puts Canada on good footing for a better third quarter, and some expect it serves as an indication for a shorter recession. Israeli lawmakers will put the natural gas outline agreement up for discussion in the Israeli parliament today, but will not yet vote on the matter. The latest obstruction to the gas agreement came last week as Israel's Minister of the Economy, Aryeh Deri, said he would not sign off on a clause bypassing the outgoing Israel Antitrust Authority Commissioner. Instead, Deri is asking to wait for the appointment of a new Antitrust Authority Commissioner to study the gas agreement and decide whether to approve an exemption for the gas developers from cartel arrangements. But Netanyahu has changed his mind to keep the option of putting the gas agreement to a Knesset vote, allowing the government to convene the parliament at 48 hours' notice. Oil prices dropped more than 2% on Wednesday, aggravating concerns that an oversupply of crude could last longer than expected. The drop came just a day after an 8% fall in U.S. Brent crude prices. Oil prices had been on the rise in the 3 days prior, surging 25%. Analysts blamed the fall on a stronger than expected build in U.S. crude stocks and weak U.S. manufacturing data. And we're joined now on the phone by Andy Bush, financial markets expert. Andy.
Hi, Binyamin.
How's it going?
Hey, good.
Global
Rocking
markets.
and rolling in the markets today. That's
yeah,
crazy.
Global markets.
Always.
So they're down again today. Tell us, Andy, is this all because of China, and is there an end in sight?
Well, the volatility will stay for some time. There's a lot of reassessment going on globally about China and what their growth levels are. We really don't know what they are. The Chinese authorities release it. It always comes out, it seems, at 7%. But we know other factors are showing and other indicators are showing growth that's half that rate. And so in the emerging market world, you're seeing countries like Brazil, Taiwan, Australia, all being negatively impacted by the drop in Chinese demand for their commodities and for imports. So this is having a cooling effect on the global economy, and no one's quite sure how far China's economic growth is going down.
Okay, and a related topic, of course, there's been so much uncertainty regarding a potential rate hike in the U.S. It's been up and coming for so long. Do you have any insight to share on what the Fed has planned?
Right. Here's my insight. They really don't know what they're doing. As much as we would like to believe that the Federal Reserve, which could be the global central bank for the world, has got it all under control, they really don't. They're looking at data for the United States, and it indicates on a growth side that they should be raising interest rates. Yet on an inflation-related matter, they're not. It's very, very low. The drop in global energy prices has helped that go down. But also the volatility in the markets and the uncertainty over China is telling them to hold off. So I would say right now, as far as September goes, the Fed should raise rates. But my guess is, and my belief is, that they will wait until December now.
And Andy, is there anything that governments around the world could do to get the markets moving in the right direction?
That is a great question. Yes. This is the point where we should realize that monetary policy can only help so much. That's clearly pointed out in China and in the United States. Authorities need to act. They need to reform their economies. They need to change public policy. In the United States, we need to reform the tax code here significantly. Right. We also need to reduce burdensome government regulations. And that's really for the rest of the world, too. Everybody should be doing this.
Clearly, a lot of work ahead for all the governments around the world, especially in the United States. Andy Bush, thanks for joining us. Venezuela and China have signed a deal for a $5 billion loan designed to increase the OPEC country's oil production. But until the loan has an effect, what was once Latin America's most affluent country continues to suffer food shortages, with a debt default and a complete economic collapse just lurking around the corner. Shelby Weiner has more.
Imagine a world where empty supermarkets have 5-hour lines to enter. That's the world Venezuela has been facing for over a year. Coffee, oil, flour, common household items are what citizens most highly covet. And in recent weeks, the waits have become longer as the consumer staples become scarcer.
It is difficult to find food. To get only a few things, we have huge lines starting from 4 a.m., even 3 a.m. Now it's 10 and nothing has been solved. There aren't any products.
The food shortage crisis took a turn towards the illicit. Looting has become a growing epidemic in the struggling country. 132 incidents have been reported in the first half of the year, and the trend is burgeoning.
What we saw in July without the consolidated data is that there has been a surge in vandalism at supermarkets and points of sale and transportation of food.
The government declined to comment. Critics say the socialist regime needs to act. Grocery stores are state-run, a system in place from Hugo Chavez when ample oil revenue helped stock the shelves.
If the government of Nicolas Maduro manages to implement democratic reforms for economic matters, food, and other rights, the tensions and conflict will decrease. While that does not happen, we will see a trend of growing protests and violence.
Dysfunctional currency controls limit Venezuela's ability to import, and the decade-long oil boom is over, leaving the government struggling for cash. Maduro is projected to do poorly in this year's election. High inflation and the currency collapse have left the economy and its people stranded. For now, all citizens can do is hope for the future and hope for food.
It's the key of hope, because there's nothing inside. It's the hope that something will suddenly arrive. But there's nothing in the shops.
And now, smugglers have started taking advantage of subsidized goods, reselling them on the black market. The situation is dire. Tensions are on the rise as many are desperate to simply stock their kitchens.
Over now to an interview regarding a discrepancy in educational funding between different areas in Israel.
Well, a new study says Israel invests 13,000 shekels per student in settlements outside the main blocks, almost double what it invests in a student in the periphery. For insight on that study, we are joined now by Itamar Gazala, Research Director at the Macro Center for Political Economics. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, firstly, for some of our international viewers, tell us about your organization. Does it have any political affiliation?
The Macro Center for Political Economics is a nonpartisan NGO. We're a think tank who our main goal is to provide the recommendations for decision makers and for the wide public.
All right. Well, provide us more details of the study.
Okay, so this study it's a really new study. It was published 3 weeks ago, and we checked the allocation of resources to different priority areas, national priority areas, including the West Bank and the Galilee, the North Galilee, and the Negev in the south. And the bottom line, what we found is in the past 10 years, the West Bank gets $1.3 billion in the past 10 years for education, the extra expenditure, more than the national average, excluding the West Bank.
Interesting. Well, Were the findings in line with expectations?
I guess they were, because it's not a surprise to most of the public that the what's called the more state religious schools get more budgets for their students, and maybe you could say because they have extra biblical lessons or stuff like that, but I don't think it was really a surprise. We were just presenting the data as it is.
What surprised you about the findings?
I guess what was the most surprising is that the settlements east of the defense barrier in the West Bank were getting much higher resources than the ones in the west of the barrier in the West Bank, and that was pretty surprising because in the consensus, people think that in a future arrangement, if there will be, so these settlements would be maybe evacuated or maybe not under Israeli control, and anyway, the Israeli government allocates more resources to those settlements.
Well, the ministry actually responded to your study. Let's take a listen. Here we have them saying the average cost per student for the school year of 2013 through 2014 is 16,300 shekels for the nation, in contrast to 15,500 shekels for Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, as it is known internationally. Therefore, it is unclear from where the Macro Institute got their numbers and on what those numbers are based. In addition, the average number of students per class in the regular national system stands at 28, while the average number in Judea and Samaria stands at 27.2. So what is your reaction? Why are these numbers so different?
We relied only on official data from the Central Bureau of Statistics and other official resources. We didn't invent anything. We didn't make our own survey. It's all relied on official data. So I would be happy to see the data that the Ministry of Education is referring to, and maybe we can see if there's a difference.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the program. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
And now for a closer look at the economies in the Middle East and Asia, we're joined by Ayman Siksak. Ayman, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Binyamin. Good to be here.
You're taking us to Afghanistan right now.
I am, and with good news. Would you believe it?
I would believe it.
This is a story about how sometimes the crisis of war or the remains of war can be turned into opportunities, which doesn't happen too often. Now, of course, you know about the U.S. war in Afghanistan. We all do. Now, during the war, NATO had set up several airports within Afghanistan to help fight the Taliban, to help the U.S. military fight the Taliban. And 8 of these airports are now being transferred to the Afghani government to be used as airports for all intents and purposes, civilian airports to be used by the government. They're worth nearly $2 billion, so this is a big deal for Afghanistan. And some of the other airports that NATO has built will be dismantled because they're too remote and small, but these are the main ones that it built, and they're now being transported to the Afghani government, and it has a lot of meanings for the local economy.
Of course, yeah. The airport is key to those kind of things. It's, of course, not the first time either in the Second World War. There were similar things that happened with the U.S. Army that went in different places.
That's right. And one of the main factors here is that these airports were built in mountainous regions, regions that are virtually cut off from central Afghanistan.
To access.
Exactly. Civilians can't access these areas. There are no railroads. There are no roads for cars or even for people getting there by foot. So it will connect Afghanistan internally, but it'll also connect it to South Asia, because these airports are pretty massive, as we learned from this.
Clearly an important development for the economy there. What else do you have here?
Well, we also need to talk about a little about the India Arab Forum, which will be happening in Dubai this November, mid-November. And this is another initiative by Narendra Modi, who's a very financially oriented prime minister, to connect India to the Middle East. He's hoping to attract Arab investors from Egypt, Kuwait, Qatar, and Jordan and interest them in the Indian economy, especially within the innovation sector and technology. He wants to show them what India can do. He feels that India has been disconnected from foreign investors for too long, and this was... Yes, this
well,
was actually...
of course, has been on his rainbow tour, so to speak, around the world. I mean, from the U.S. to the Arab countries to Europe, he's been everywhere at this point, and I guess it makes a lot of sense for him to pull in his so-called Arab neighbors, if you want.
That's right. And I mean, he has been criticized for that in the past. They said that his financial reforms in India have actually made it more convenient for foreign investors, not so much for Indians themselves. He promised to develop infrastructure within India that didn't happen as to the large scale that he had promised, but it is becoming more and more attractive to foreign investors. And now he's hoping to rail in the Middle East as well. In November, we'll see how he does.
Fantastic. Well, Ayman Siksak, thanks for giving us more information regarding these positive developments in Afghanistan and India. That concludes our Economy Magazine, your daily source for economic reports at I-24 News. I'm Binyamin Tjong-Alvares. Follow me on Twitter at Tjong-Alvares and send us your comments via the feedback link at the bottom of our page. Thanks for watching.